Hi, I'm Christine Loughlin, and I'm here with my dad, Brendan Loughlin, on this beautiful day, January 10th, 2019. And we're going to return to the story of Joseph, which we had just begun to tap into. It's such a beautiful story. It's a long story, and we're going to recap a little bit and then go deeper into the story. So we'll begin with Joseph, 17 years old. He is the 11th son of Jacob, and his mother was Rachel. He had a younger brother, Benjamin, who was also the son of Rachel. And Joseph was very highly favored by his father. Wouldn't you say, Dad, he was probably the most beloved
Yes.
of all the
Yeah,
sons?
the scripture actually says that he was the most favored. Actually says that in the text. So,
Yeah.
yes.
So his father, Jacob, who was a righteous man, a God loving man, God was with Jacob, um, would sew this beautiful multicolored coat for Joseph, and he would give it to him. And he had, of course, 12 sons, but Jacob would get the coat, and there was some resentment over that, and from his brothers. The other thing was that Joseph was a dreamer. He would have these dreams. Dreams were surely from God. The first dream, um, I'll let you tell, Dad. It was about the sheaves.
Yeah, well, we did talk about the dream about how his brothers would bow down to them and to him, and his parents would bow down to him also. And of course, this would all happen in the years ahead, where they would eventually come to him as he became king of Egypt. So we did cover that. I think today we were thinking more that we left off, it was really one of the great story, when he was in the home of Potiphar, when he was sold as a slave. And we did leave off there how Potiphar's wife had falsely accused him, and he was thrown into the dungeon, and yet he prospered in the dungeon because, as the keeper of the prison recognized, this was an extraordinary man. Everything that Joseph did, no matter where he was, he prospered.
Right.
Now, this dungeon was, as we said on the other one, was the king's prison. It was the king's ward. So all the higher end people would be in there. And I think today, Christine and I thought about, we want to talk more about the two people that he interacted, other prisoners, the most with, the butler, chief butler, and chief baker. First, I think we wanted to say these were officers. It wasn't like just an ordinary butler or baker. They were in charge of many, many people, the whole palace, the whole system. And they had both found, did something that offended Pharaoh, and it doesn't say in the scripture, so we don't really know, but they both wound up, and this is where they were at this point in time when they both would have these two dreams. So Christine will tell you a little bit about the dreams.
Yeah, so they came to Joseph on the same day, and first the butler would tell Joseph his dream, and the dream was that he would see a vine, and there were three branches coming off the vine, and there were clusters of grapes. So he would, in the dream, he would take the grapes, and they were ripe, very ripe, and he would squeeze them into the cup, Pharaoh's cup, and he would hand the cup to Pharaoh. And he asked Joseph what it meant, and Joseph said, all interpretations of dreams come from God. And so he did tell him the interpretation, which came from God, and that was that the three branches were 3 days, and the cup that he was holding, the butler was holding, would be the cup that he would actually give Pharaoh, that he would be returned to his job as the butler, and he would hand Pharaoh the cup, and that it would be in 3 days. So then I'll let you tell the dream of the baker because it's a little bit different.
Well, the baker would be all excited when he would hear this great news from the other officer, the butler, like, wow, we're getting out of here.
Right.
That had to be his thought. It's like this,
Definitely was,
yeah,
yeah.
like this is ending. Wow, like he just won $1,000,000 now. Let him. I will tell Joseph my dream. So you can imagine the butler all anticipating this good news would also apply to him. So it would be just the opposite, where the baker would wind up with the. Tell me, you know more about the loaves that were on his head.
Yeah, so he would have three baskets. They were white baskets on his head, and I think the basket probably in the middle would be filled with baked goods and meats, and the birds would be eating out of that basket. And then he would ask Joseph what this meant.
Yeah, yeah. That's then Joseph would say to him that your head will be lifted up, and you will be hanged, and in 3 days. The same thing, that the three baskets would represent 3 days, and the birds who would be eating out of the basket would be a symbol of his flesh being devoured by the birds of the field.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the baker. The baker is
Poor
now like,
baker.
okay, and it doesn't. I mean, Joseph was. Remember, these dreams are from God, the
Mm.
interpretation. So I'm sure it had to be hard for Joseph to tell the baker that, but
He had to speak the
he
truth.
had to speak the truth, and then it would go on in 3 days. That's exactly what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
The chief butler would be restored to Pharaoh and be able to give him the cup again, and the baker would be hanged. So
And that was on Pharaoh's birthday, so Pharaoh probably had on that day he would have a a festival,
feast,
a
yeah.
feast, and he would pardon one prisoner, and the other prisoner would be hung. And so, if we look at like what these two men represent in the scriptures, because there's always types, we can say that the butler represents the weak class, those who will be restored. And what would you say about the other, the baker dad? What would he represent?
Well, to me, it would be like the parable that Jesus gave of the wheat and the tares. So that what would happen, and the interesting thing about that, there would be a separation. They would grow together.
Yep.
So Jesus would give the truth. This is found in Matthew chapter 13. Jesus would give this parable of this, what would happen for the future.
Mm.
He would come, give the truth, and then he said it would be like a field. The field would be the world,
Mm.
and that after he had left, he would plant the truth, the wheat, and then after he had left, the evil one, Satan, would come in and plant tares. So tares are counterfeit. They look just like wheat, and they grow together side by side. So they're in the same, and yet when the wheat becomes full, because it's real, it's humble, it bows, it bends over.
Mm.
And the tares, they don't have anything in them. They're just counterfeits. They stand up. So now, after everything, when you come to the end of the age, look at those are falling over. These are standing up. So Jesus said, this is when the separation will come. Let them grow all through the ages. So at the second presence, there would be separating. So one would be put in the barn, just like the butler was restored to serve Pharaoh. The wheat would be taken and put in the barn, and then the tares would be bundled and thrown into the fire and destroyed.
Mm.
So this is kind of a picture, in a way, at the second presence, no one will be allowed to be counterfeit anymore. And it's really that the tares will not be destroyed as people. It's just we all are going to have to be honest. We can't be tares anymore. We can't be counterfeit anymore. Simply won't be allowed. Why? Too much light, too much information. And we can see this all through the world, whether you're in business or politics or religion, or you have to do what's right. Because if something had gone on for hundreds of years, it's now coming out because the light is shining, and that's the presence, the second presence. So the butler and the baker, it's just my opinion. When I look at that, it just reminds me of the parables that Jesus would give. And we know that Paul said all these stories in the Old Testament, they're true stories, but they were shadows, meaning they're like maps of what would happen in the future.
Right.
So
We know that, everything in the Bible is there for a reason. God never uses any words in vain. So everything means something. So these dreams, this happening with this butler and this baker, it means something. We know that the butler, Joseph asked the butler, please remember me to Pharaoh. When you get out and are restored, please tell him what I have done for you and remember me. And surely Joseph thought that he would be getting out as well soon when the butler was restored. But the butler forgot for a couple of years, and so Joseph remained in prison for those next 2 years until we come to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh having a dream. And Pharaoh's dream, of course, was when he was standing by the Nile in the dream, and he would see seven I think it was, he started with very gaunt cows.
No,
fat cows.
The fat cows would come first. Yeah.
Okay, so he saw the seven fatted cows, beautiful, thick, beefy cows, and then he would dream that he saw seven ugly, gaunt, skinny, sickly cows, and the sickly, skinny, gaunt cows would eat the fat cows, but they would remain sick and gaunt and ugly, and it was really disturbing to him. So the second part of the dream, I'll let you tell, is about the corn.
Yeah, so what would happen, Pharaoh would have two dreams.
Right.
So Pharaoh would have the same night, have the second dream, and it would be very similar. So you'd have the 7 full stalks of ears of corn, followed by 7 skinny stalks, and it would be the same like with the cows. So then the skinny stalks would eat the fat ones, and it would be the same thing. They'd still be skinny.
Right.
So of course, Pharaoh's first reaction was, I will call in my magicians. These were the so-called wise men who knew all things, the great brains of Egypt, and none of them, it says, not one of them could give an interpretation to the dream. And then finally, that's when the butler speaks up. Oh, now he remembers.
He remembers.
I want to give the butler a little more credit. I know it's like people are like, oh, that mean butler, he should have gotten Joseph out. I think a lot about things, about types and antitypes, and Joseph would have been 28 years old when the butler and the baker, when that happened. Joseph had to be 30. He's a type of Jesus. When Jesus went to Jordan with John the Baptist, he was 30. That was the law, that for a man to be a priest, the Levite, that was the law. You had to be 30 if you were going to take this position. So as much as Joseph, I'm sure he wanted to get out, I think my own opinion is possibly Pharaoh, or God, it would be Jehovah, of course, would influence the butler to be quiet in his own way. I don't know how he did it, but
he could have just forgotten.
He could have forgotten, but when God is working, he can make things happen.
Right.
There was a lot of things were going on back then. You have the whole issue of Potiphar and his wife.
Right.
So there was a lot of things that were going on where the butler might have just like, it's better. Let me wait on this a little bit. Let me get used to it. So. But that's another story.
He was probably just happy to get out and be free, and
right.
Then we don't know where his mind went. But you know what? He did 2 years later say, there is a man.
A Hebrew.
Yep, a young Hebrew that interpreted my dream and the chief baker's dream, and both dreams, the interpretation came true. And it was, so Pharaoh immediately calls for Joseph. And it says they get him out of the dungeon. He shaves, changes his clothes, and is within very quickly presented in front of Pharaoh. Pharaoh tells him his dreams, and he asked Joseph for an interpretation. And again, Joseph said, "It is God who interprets all dreams." Joseph never took credit for interpreting a dream. He always gave credit to God, that it would come from God. And so Pharaoh told him his dream, and of course, Joseph would tell him that this meant 7 years of plenty for Egypt, and then 7 years of a terrible famine that would kill many, many people. And Joseph gave him the directions on what to do. And that, of course, would be to take 1/5 during the 7 years of plenty of all the grain and store it in various cities, various storehouses, and that would keep them through the following 7 years of famine. And I'll let you touch on that a little bit more, on what it means, and how Pharaoh would then, Joseph would tell Pharaoh that he should find a wise and competent man to take on this task, and how Pharaoh would look upon Joseph and say, "You are the most godly, God is with you." And he knew he was competent, and he knew that Joseph had the answer. So he would make Joseph, he gave Joseph the job, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, he made him second in charge, and he gave him the second chariot, Air Force Two. All of a sudden, Joseph's like, "Got Air Force Two."
Right. Quickly. This happened so quickly.
This happened so quickly. Pharaoh, as we were reading earlier, where it said Pharaoh recognized that God was with him.
Yes.
And it was the same thing that Potiphar
Yes.
earlier had recognized, that God was with this man.
Right.
So,
and the jail.
The jailer, it's like God is with him. And this is really the most beautiful story of Jesus, that
it is.
So many people who would follow him would recognize that he was the Messiah, that thou art the Son of God. God is with this man, and the prosperity, the loaves, the fishes and the loaves, it was prosperity that the healing of thousands of people, God was with him. So this is a picture for all of us. Like Paul said, these are maps of what will happen in the future. So the whole thing with the dream, with the plenty and the famine, Joseph explained, he said, if this is not done, the famine will consume the land and there'll be nothing left. And it's a picture of how the beautiful part about this is God will not let this world be destroyed.
Right.
He will not let it. He will, just like what would happen at the time of the famine, people will come to their wits' end. But Joseph is there for us, and if we bow the knee, and those who won't, still, even those who did not, they were still saved. And in the end, when they ran out of everything and they came to their wits' end, at that point in time, they said, we have no more money, no more cattle, whatever they had, Joseph would buy from them. And then they finally said, we have nothing left. And Joseph, but ourselves. And Joseph said, okay, I'll take that. And this is a picture of, and then he healed them. So this is a story of hope. And it's a story, remember, this is a story of the kingdom. This is a story of that last day, the great judgment day. Peter says it's 1,000 years long. And it's really a story of restitution. It is not beating people down. It's lifting people up, restoring them to the point like Adam was, to perfection. And then they will have knowledge, and then they will be given the choice at the end of the 1,000-year day. So this is the joy of the story of Joseph.
So Egypt kind of represents the world, and we know that Joseph represents Jesus, who will open the storehouse of food, and people will go to Jesus, and he will give the food. salvation is free,
Mm-hmm.
and Jesus is uh, our king. Joseph Pharaoh put the ring, took it off of his hand, put it on Joseph's hand. Pharaoh put a gold chain around his neck. He put a different garment on him and set him in that chariot. This is a picture of all power and authority being given to Joseph, all power and authority by God giving to Jesus. God is still remains on the throne as the highest, but he is given all power and authority to Jesus to do this job of feeding the world, and Jesus is doing it right now. And he died for us, so he took on our sin. So what a beautiful comparison between Joseph, and when he would ride in that chariot, they would yell, "Bow the knee." And this is exactly what we are to do for Jesus, bow the knee. So just a couple similarities there. So Joseph would go on from that point during those 7 years, and he was brilliant. He got all of this done. It says that there was so much plenty that he stopped counting. He couldn't even keep up with it. So all the storehouses in all the cities were filled to the brim with grain. And this was from God, given to Joseph. And Pharaoh, of course, gave Joseph that job, and he was brilliant. He did it perfectly.
It's a beautiful story, and just go back to Genesis in those beautiful chapters 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, then right through until the last book of the last chapter in Genesis is chapter 50, where that's way further down where Joseph would die, and that at that point in time he would make this beautiful prophecy, and he would say to the children that of his brothers that your children will go, you will leave Egypt and you will go into this new land that God, like were your fathers, the land of Canaan, land of milk and honey. It's going to happen. And he made them take an oath that they would also take his bones. So when they would all leave Egypt with Moses, who was another type of Jesus, when they would come out of Egypt, there was Joseph, and he would be brought into the land of milk and honey. So we are all, the whole world, as bad as it is right now, and it is pretty terrible in many ways, but it's ending. It's Paul called it the present evil world, but he said the world to come. So the world, the planet, the houses, the trees, the people will all be here. It's the system of Satan. He is being bound. And when he will soon be fully bound, a lot of the things that are happening now, we've seen, he cannot fool people. There's too many cameras around. There's too much information around.
Right.
He's being bound and bound and bound. It's not much longer. We're going to keep doing the videos, and we'll continue on the story of Joseph. There's so much more, but we like to do some of the little details here and there and bring out little points that are very important. He is the picture of Jesus, and he has nothing but heart in him. The next video we'll be talking about is the interaction with his brothers and the love he has for his brothers, and he tells them he will nourish them. But that'll be the next one. That's going to be a beautiful story, how they come to him after they had tried to murder him. So this is the love of the Father, Jehovah, and his Son, Jesus. They are only wanting, God so loved the world so that the world would not perish and have everlasting life. So whosoever believe in him, bow the knee. There will be an opportunity for everyone, just like the prophecy said.
As in Adam all die, so in Christ all shall be made alive. And that's 1 Corinthians 15:22 or 22:15. I can't remember. But anyway, I do want to mention that Joseph was given a wife, and that was when it was before the famine came, so he had to be somewhere in his 30s. And he would have two sons, and the sons were, I'll let you give those names. They're
Well,
hard to pronounce.
Ephraim and Manasseh.
Manasseh was born first.
Right. And they would become part of the 12 tribes of Israel.
Right.
One of the tribes, I think it was Dan, would be altered and changed for some reason that Dan had done. But so the two children of Joseph would become tribes of Israel.
Mm.
So part of the 12 tribes. So we're going to go into that. That's a beautiful story. And that'll take us right down way further to the point when his father was dying. When his father would come, that's right, next time we have to do that, when he would get to see his father again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a beautiful story. Today we wanted to talk more about how amazing it was with Pharaoh, and only Joseph, Pharaoh picked him. He was the only one that could solve the problem. And there is no politician, there is no government, only Jesus can solve the problems that this world is now going through. So you would love the story of Joseph. Just take your time, and we're going to keep bringing the details out that we see in our opinions. And they're only opinions, but we love it, and I think that's where we should end it at this point. And we should look forward. I think the next time I really want to talk about his interaction with his family, his brothers.
Right, because they would have to come to
come.
Egypt for food.
Food.
Jacob would send them, having no idea that the one giving the food, the man in charge, Joseph, was his son that he thought perished.
And
so, what a story. And the brothers don't know either.
The dream that Joseph said, you will bow down to me, here they would come for food, and
they were bowing.
They see this man who is in charge, this king of Egypt, and they go there and they bow.
Yes.
We are here. And then Joseph said, you are spies. And they would now find themselves in the same situation that Joseph did.
Right. Well, we should mention that Joseph knew that they were his brothers, and he was moved with compassion, but he would have to test them to see where their minds are.
The text says he spoke roughly to them.
Yes.
Only for a while. But God right now is speaking roughly in many ways to the world, or Jesus, through Jesus, because the world is not following. Their hearts still need to be brought to their wits' end, but there is a blessing coming. And just like Joseph stopped speaking roughly and would kiss them on the neck and said to them, I will nourish you, and he would put them in the best part of the land of Egypt, it will happen for the world. I think our batteries are going to run out.
So let's say we'll end here today, and our next video will be with when the brothers would come, and how the story is amazing.
Yeah.
And it's probably the best part of the story, but the whole story is wonderful. But
best line in the Old Testament, I think, is when I am Joseph, your brother, and they're all like. And that, we're going to go into details. That has got to be the most amazing part of the story of Joseph.
And Joseph would weep, and he was so unbelievable. I think he was blown away. They were blown away. Jacob would be blown away. This is God, and only God could make this happen. So we'll end here, and we'll see you next time. God bless everybody.